Hi, welcome back to another web development video where I'll show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video, we're going to continue our series of showing you how to do some of the web development basics, the things that you need to know to make good, accessible websites, except we're doing it inside of Webflow. So not writing code, but using the graphic interface to write the code for us. In this video, we're going to cover positioning of different elements on the page. And what positioning does is allows us to create relationships between all of the different parts of the website. So every element has a relationship to the other elements. Now inside of Webflow, we find it here in the position panel, I guess is what we're going to call them. So inside the position panel, we have these different positions here. You can just set these all back to what their original were. So when you first add an element, you can see all of our elements here for the website. When you add an element to the page, it automatically becomes, see if we click on masthead, it becomes a static element. So that's the default. And what static means is that however it's written in the HTML, that's how everything is laid out. So first comes the body, and then next the browser will write the masthead, and then we'll write whatever's inside the masthead, and then inside the menu, and so on and so forth. So it goes top down and renders the page from the top of the HTML all the way to the bottom of the HTML. And it does this in a couple of passes. It renders the HTML, and then it renders the CSS, and then it renders the JavaScript. So there is definitely a flow at which the document unfolds into the browser. Now this happens, especially on most people's high-speed internet connections. It happens very fast, and most of the time you don't realize that those three things are happening, not necessarily at the same time. So we can change the relationships between the different elements in order to give us finer control over the way things are laid out on the page. So instead of everything being in these just sort of boxes stacked on top of boxes, we can actually change the relationship between them. We're going to use this section here called sidebar, and let me just give it a background color, just something that we can see the relationship with some of these things. We're going to change the background color of this sidebar as well. Let's do something a little less like that. So we have our button, we have our sidebar, and both of those elements, well, it's not sidebar, it's just a heading 3 with sidebar in it. And these are inside of this sidebar container. So you can see our container, and then it's got 2 elements inside of it. Now the sidebar is currently position static, and if we set it to relative, and we take our button, we set it to relative, and we take our text and we set it to relative, you can see that nothing happens. So nothing has changed here. No relationships have changed. The elements have not changed. And static is the default, but relative gives us some different options for the elements to play off of each other. So in order for us to use absolute positioning, for instance, then the parent container needs to have a relative positioning, or whatever container you want the element to be positioned relative to needs to have position relative. If, say in this instance, if the heading 3 were absolutely positioned, then it would look first at the parent element, which is the sidebar, and if it had no relative positioning but it was static, then it would move all the way up to the next element. And so the body is always positioned the body's position here, you can see it can't be edited. So an absolutely positioned item has to be relative to something. So it defaults to the body, which we can see that play out in just a moment. So we've got the sidebar set to relative, and what happens if we take this text and we make it position absolute? Okay, so a few things have happened. Our button text is moved up and is now at the top left corner of our box, our container. The sidebar, you can see, used to go all the way across the page, but now it's behaving more like an inline element. Its space is only as wide as this. So it's only as wide as whatever's inside of the element, the text in there. So let's go back on that. And now this element, we get a few extra positioning types of alignment tools inside of Webflow. We can also choose to do numeric. If none of these fit what we want to do, we can actually use numbers or relative units like viewport heights or viewport widths or ems or rems or pixels or whatever we want to use in order to move this element around. So let's just play with these a little bit. The default is here, and that would be the top and left. We can also position it to the top and the right. And remember, all of this is relative to this box, right? Because this box is set to position relative. If it were static, then you can see that it defaults to the body. Okay, so it's been taken out of the flow of the document, and the flow of the document is just top to bottom, left to right. As everything goes, it's sort of laid out like little blocks on top of each other. But as soon as you set it to position absolute or position fixed, you have actually removed it from the regular flow of the document, and now it can be positioned. If it's absolute positioning, it can be positioned anywhere inside the body, and if it's a fixed position, then it can be positioned anywhere relative to the viewport. So right now this is being positioned relative to the body element, so that if body, let's see, if we took body and we put a little bit of padding, let's see, okay, maybe on the body, maybe it doesn't work with padding. Let's try, well, that's not right. Okay, so that doesn't have any relation to anything, so I thought that would work. But anyway, it's in relation to the body. If we make this sidebar relative again, then you can see that it's positioned to the top and the right of the sidebar, and as we just saw, padding and margin don't affect it. It's sort of outside of even the box model. But sort of not, because it's still adhering to this box itself. So that's a little confusing, and we can try some of these other positions. So bottom right, bottom left, it can take up, let's see, it can take up the entire space here. So this is going to be called just to the right, to the bottom, to the left, to the top, and then it can take up the full amount. And then we can control also, you know, where it's positioned. You know, it's positioned 21% from the left side of the containing element. Will it give us that? Yeah. So this is the left position of the element, and if this were 0, you know, you would just essentially be moving it from the left side, what percentage. And notice you can do a negative percentage and pull it off the page. But it's only moving this left side. It's a little bit more like an image editing program where you can literally control you can sort of drag it all over the map if you wanted to, all over the canvas. This would be our canvas, and this is our element that we can sort of put anywhere that we want to. And notice right now, let's see. Let's do top and left. And notice right now that the button is over the sidebar. That's because it still retains its position here. So sidebar is our container. Heading is the first element. And then the next element is button. But as soon as we remove sidebar from the flow of the document, we reveal that button is actually, if you think about all the elements in layers, but button is the topmost layer of this section because it's the last thing. So this is the bottom layer next to the bottom. This element here is actually at the topmost layer of the website. If you think about it as a stack of pancakes, this is the top pancake and this is the bottom one. And so every layer here, if we do position, if we just made them all position absolute, then they would all stack up. This would be the one on top, and this would be at the bottom up here. So inside of this, because our button text comes last in the source order here, it actually is on top. But if we move it, now sidebar is on top, and we can't see that button anymore. So let's undo that. You can give a button an explicit width. So let's say we want it to be 100% of the container, and then it would again take up 100% of the container. And when we scroll, it doesn't move. So this is exactly what it has been, except we have the ability to move it around the page like this. And if we take care, if we take this off, make it auto, maybe 0.
Why are you coming out with that? Wash the dishes when you're done, right?
Well, it didn't work very well. So let's bring this back to its original. There's still a few things here. Should be top left. Okay. Sorry, that got messed up a little bit. So this is absolute positioning, and then if we take the same element and we make it fixed positioning, now it's fixed to not this element, it's fixed to the entire viewport. So in Webflow, this this box here without the UI elements actually simulates the viewport, and so we can make it to the top right or the bottom left or the bottom right, and you can see that it doesn't have anything to do with this. It has to do with the viewport, and you can really see it whenever we do this. So let's do it to the top right, and then we begin to scroll, and you can see that it's not connected to the page at all. It's connected to the viewport. So that's what a fixed width element does. Sometimes you see this with you'll see some sharing buttons maybe on the side, or you'll see a little pop-up window down here, something like that. When you scroll, the element stays in its place on the page. So this is a very common way. This is how we used to do sticky headers and things like that, to make the header stay while you scroll down the page. You can still do that. There's a better way, and I'll show you in just a minute. So that is fixed positioning, and again, you can fix it all the way to the bottom so that you scroll and you can see that all these things are underneath, and you can fix it to the top. Same thing. Although notice here, notice as well that our button still remains over top of it, which is an interesting sort of thing that happens. So that is fixed positioning, and that fixes it to the viewport, not to the body or to this element. And then the last one that we have is called position sticky. Now position sticky is a new one, and it is sort of like absolute positioning and relative positioning at the same time. It's a hybrid of both. And what we do with, you can learn a little bit about position sticky here. What we do with position sticky is that once the element hits the top of the page, and this is not a good one to do it with. Let's do it with this one here. So once the top of the page, once the page scrolls and the top of this element reaches right here, it should stick so that the rest of everything scrolls. So it acts like a fixed position element, but it stays within the flow of the document. It doesn't remove it from the flow. And then it unsticks it once the top edge of this gets away from here. So let's just do position sticky. And then as we scroll, I think its parent element needs to be relative for this to happen. Is that right? Oh, let's do the position on the top. We'll just say 0. Okay, so position top is 0, and we can do the left side if we want. That just sticks it to the left side. And let's see. Okay, is that it? Yeah. Okay, so because, let's just remove this. Maybe if we publish it, we can see it in the browser a little bit better. So let's see it in the browser. So the idea is that this section here is going to be stuck to the top as soon as we scroll. So you can see how it sticks to the top. Now it looks like it only does it because as long as this section is in place, because it's inside of a section. So if we wanted that whole section to stick to the top, we wouldn't do it to this element. Because the element is contained within this section, it won't just stick forever. It'll stick until that section reaches its end. Now if we go to the main section, because it's a part of the body, we can make it position sticky, and we can call it 0. And we'll take this one and just make it static, and then we'll see how that works. I'm just showing you generally how these things work. In a later video, I'll show you how to do like a super easy sticky menu, or a header or masthead, or something at the top of the page, a nav bar, using position sticky, and it's really easy. Same thing with the footer down at the bottom of the page. We lost our internet, maybe. Let's see. Okay, lost the internet for just a moment, but now we're back. And we published it successfully, and let's see if this entire section doesn't stick to the top. Okay. So you can see the entire section sticking to the top. And so we'll figure out how to make that actually a part of a larger element, like a header for this heading section, and that'll make it sticky to the top. And I'll also show you how to do a sticky footer at the bottom as well. But that is position sticky, and that covers all of the different types of positioning that you can do. Most of the time you're going to be using either default static or relative positioning. There are times when you do need to move elements around independently of all the other elements, and then you might use absolute, or there are things that you need to just be showing all the time even if the user is scrolling, and then you would use position fixed or position sticky, whatever is appropriate for that particular element. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll get to them as quickly as I can. Hopefully this is helpful for you in this series. If you have any suggestions, you can leave those as well for things to cover. Maybe things that aren't clear to you either in web development or in Webflow. And if you would like to pay it forward, just click the thumbs up button and like the video. That helps it to go out a little bit farther and tell YouTube that this is valuable content. If you haven't subscribed, click subscribe and click the bell notification, and you'll receive updates, actually notifications, as soon as I publish a new video, and you can check that out. And especially in this series, I'm putting them out a few a day probably, just as I can get to them and do them, and they don't take too long. I think that's all for now. If you've missed any videos, go back earlier in the playlist. I also have just a Webflow playlist, so if you want to go through that as well. There are some different videos about creating a blog and doing some different things inside of Webflow. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.